once upon a maybe, in a world so ordinary. We stumbled into something real, no crown or magic potion, just a spark that set in motion, a love no fairy tale could steal.
I was teaching history, living quietly, dreaming about adventures far away.
Then you walked into my story, turned the pages right before me, and suddenly I'm living it today. I was born to wear a crown, keep my 2 feet on the ground, but my heart was searching for much more than I met you, perfectly imperfect, and I knew that love was worth it, a kingdom could.
Sara Daniels had built a life that, while not particularly glamorous, was deeply fulfilling in its own way. At 28, she was a dedicated high school history teacher at Maplewood High, where her love for the past made even the driest lessons come alive. Her classroom was a blend of antique maps, quirky posters, and student projects, a chaotic but welcoming space where history wasn't just memorized but experienced. Each morning, Sara arrived a few minutes early to write a "This Day in History" fact on the board, often adding a witty comment that made her students groan and laugh in equal measure. Today in 1815, Napoleon escaped from Elba, she'd say dramatically, pacing the front of the class. Which, for the record, is also how I feel when I escape grading essays. The students adored her, not just for her humor but for the genuine care she showed each of them. She knew their stories, their struggles, their dreams. And in return, they confided in her, trusted her, and often lingered after class to talk about everything from homework to heartbreak. Outside of school, Sara's life was simple but content. She shared a cozy apartment with a mismatched collection of second-hand furniture and a perpetually shedding rescue cat named Oliver. Weekends were spent at local bookstores, coffee shops, or trying new recipes that almost never turned out like the photos online. Her best friend, Melissa, teased her for being an old soul trapped in a millennial body, but Sara didn't mind. Predictable was comfortable, and comfort was something she had come to cherish. At the heart of that comfort was Daniel. They'd met 2 years earlier in the most unremarkable of ways, a mutual friend's backyard barbecue, but their connection had been instant. Daniel was charming, effortlessly witty, and had an easy smile that made Sara's heart skip every time. He worked in international business, or so he said, and often told stories about his frequent work trips and family obligations overseas. There was a quiet mystery to him, but Sara never pressed too hard. She loved him for who he was in the present, the man who brought her flowers for no reason, who left her silly handwritten notes in her lunch bag, and who always knew how to make her laugh after a long day at school. Their evenings were a comforting ritual, take-out dinners on the couch, late-night documentaries, and spontaneous dance parties in the kitchen. They weren't flashy or dramatic as a couple, but their love was steady, a slow-burning flame that felt safe and real. When Daniel looked at her, it wasn't with the intensity of a fairy tale prince but with the warmth of a man who saw her, truly saw her, and loved every messy, wonderful part. Still, sometimes Sara wondered if there was more to life than lesson plans and Friday night pizza. She dreamed of traveling, of adventures beyond the familiar streets of Maplewood. And whenever she voiced those dreams, Daniel would take her hand, smile that secret smile of his, and say, "One day, Sara. One day, I'll show you the world." It was a promise she thought was romantic. She had no idea how literal it was about to become. The evening of their 2-year anniversary felt like something out of a movie. the kind of nights Sara had only ever daydreamed about between grading papers and planning lectures. Daniel had been unusually secretive all week, dropping hints about a special surprise, but refusing to give any details. All he told her was to wear the navy blue dress he loved, the one that made her eyes look like the ocean, as he often teased. When he arrived at her apartment, Daniel was dressed in a tailored suit that made him look even more impossibly handsome. He whisked her away in a sleek black car, refusing to reveal their destination until they pulled up to an elegant rooftop restaurant overlooking the city skyline. Candlelit tables glowed under strings of fairy lights, and a soft jazz band played in the background. It was romantic, extravagantly so, and Sara couldn't help but wonder how he'd managed to pull it all off. Dinner was perfect, her favorite wine, a multi-course meal that seemed to appear magically at just the right moments, and stories that made her laugh until her cheeks hurt. Daniel was attentive and affectionate, but there was something else in his demeanor too, a nervous energy beneath his usual calm. He reached for her hand more often, stared at her a little longer, and seemed to choose his words carefully. Sara noticed, but she brushed it off as anniversary jitters. As dessert arrived, a rich chocolate soufflé with "Forever" written in powdered sugar, Daniel rose from his seat. Her heart skipped. He reached into his jacket pocket and, before she could process what was happening, he was kneeling in front of her. "Sara Daniels," he began, his voice steady but soft, "from the moment I met you, you've brought light into every corner of my life. You challenge me, you ground me, and you make even the most ordinary days feel extraordinary. I can't imagine my life without you, and I don't want to." Her breath caught as he opened a small velvet box, revealing a stunning ring that shimmered under the city lights. "Will you marry me?" Tears welled up before she could stop them. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes. Of course, yes." The entire restaurant erupted into cheers and applause. Daniel slipped the ring onto her trembling hand and kissed her, a kiss filled with joy, relief, and promise. In that moment, Sara felt like the luckiest woman alive. But just as they were about to toast to their future, Daniel's smile faltered. The laughter in his eyes softened into something more serious. He set his glass down and took her hands in his. "Sara," he said carefully, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago." Her heart skipped. "What is it?" He hesitated, the weight of unspoken words hanging heavily between them. "I love you more than anything in this world," he began, "and because I love you, I can't let us move forward without you knowing the whole truth. Before we plan our life together, you need to know who I really am." Sara frowned, confused but curious. Daniel had always been a little mysterious about his past, but she trusted him completely. Still, the way he looked at her now, as if everything they'd built rested on the next few words, sent a ripple of uncertainty through her chest. "Who you really are," she echoed, half laughing. "What, are you secretly a superhero or something?" Daniel didn't laugh. He held her gaze, his thumb brushing over the engagement ring he had just placed on her finger. "Not exactly," he said quietly. "But I am someone you might not have expected." The city lights twinkled around them, and Sara felt the first flutter of nerves beneath her joy. She didn't know it yet, but her entire world was about to change. The night of the proposal lingered in Sara's mind like a dream she couldn't quite wake from. She barely slept, too giddy and overwhelmed by what had just happened. Every time she looked down at her hand, the ring sparkled under the lamplight, and her heart did a somersault. She was engaged, to the man she loved, her best friend, her partner in laughter and late-night pizza. It all felt so perfect, until she remembered Daniel's strange, serious words after she'd said yes. "You need to know who I really am." That sentence echoed in her head as she made coffee the next morning, trying to convince herself it wasn't something to worry about. Maybe he had a secret past. Maybe he'd been married before. Maybe, she winced, he was in witness protection. None of those possibilities prepared her for the truth. Daniel arrived early, looking far more formal than usual. Gone were the jeans and worn-in sweaters she loved. Instead, he wore a tailored navy suit and carried himself with a calm, practiced grace that felt different. Older. Nobler. "Sara," he said gently, taking her hands as she stood in the doorway still in her pajamas. "I owe you an explanation." She raised an eyebrow. "This is starting to feel like one of those reality TV reveals. Should I brace myself?" He chuckled nervously. "Perhaps you should." Taking a breath, he led her to the couch and sat down across from her. "My name is not just Daniel Whitmore. It's Daniel Alexander Jameson. And I'm not just a businessman." He paused, searching her face. "I'm Prince Daniel of St. Ives." Sara blinked. Then laughed. "Okay. Prince Daniel? Like, from a kingdom?" "Yes," he said simply. She laughed again, harder this time. "All right, Your Highness, good one. Are we playing pretend now?" But Daniel didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. "I'm serious, Sara." The room fell silent. Her pulse quickened as she studied his face, trying to find a hint of the joke, a twitch of a smirk, a playful glint in his eyes. But there was none. He looked utterly sincere. "I was born into the royal family of St. Ives, a small kingdom on the coast of Europe," he explained. "My father is King Charles. My mother is Queen Helena. And I am next in line for the throne." Sara's mouth opened and closed. "You're telling me that my boyfriend, my fiancé, is an actual prince?" "Yes. And you've been hiding this from me for 2 years?" "Yes. Because..." Daniel sighed. "Because I needed to know if someone could love me for me, not for the title or the crown. Life in the palace is complicated. It's full of expectations, scrutiny, and obligations. I needed, to experience life outside of that. To live as just Daniel." Sara stood up and paced the living room, running her hands through her hair. "This is insane. You're saying I've been dating the heir to a European throne, and I had no idea?" "I wanted to tell you sooner," he said softly. "But the longer we were together, the more I feared that revealing the truth would change everything. And now that we're planning a life together, you deserve to know all of it." Sara stopped pacing and turned to face him, her heart pounding. "So what happens now? Do we visit your palace or something?" Daniel hesitated. About that, a sharp knock on the door interrupted them. Sara frowned. "Are you expecting someone?" He swallowed. "Yes. Actually, I am." When she opened the door, her jaw nearly hit the floor. Standing in the hallway were 3 impeccably dressed men and 2 women in formal attire, each bowing deeply as they addressed Daniel as Your Highness. Behind them, a sleek black limousine waited by the curb, a royal crest gleaming on its side. "Your Highness," one of them said, "the arrangements have been made. The plane departs in 2 hours. Her Majesty is expecting you, and Miss Daniels." Sara's knees felt weak. She turned to Daniel, her voice a whisper. Her Majesty? My mother, he admitted with a sheepish smile. The Queen. Sara clutched the doorframe for support as the enormity of it all sank in. Yesterday, she'd been a history teacher in New Jersey with a loving boyfriend and a predictable life. Today, she was apparently engaged to a prince, and about to meet a queen. Her world had officially flipped upside down. And this was just the beginning. Sara had always dreamed of traveling to Europe, sipping espresso in Paris, wandering cobblestone streets in Italy, maybe even taking a cheesy selfie by Big Ben. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared her for her arrival in St. Ives. The tiny kingdom, nestled on the edge of the Adriatic, was breathtaking, postcard-perfect villages with pastel rooftops, rolling green hills dotted with vineyards, and a glittering coastline that looked like it had been painted by an artist. But as the royal motorcade swept her from the airport toward the palace, the beauty was overshadowed by a growing knot of nerves in her stomach. This is unreal, she whispered, staring out the window as locals waved flags bearing the royal crest. Daniel squeezed her hand. Welcome to my world. And what a world it was. The palace of St. Ives looked like something out of a fairy tale. Towering spires, marble fountains, sweeping staircases, and grand halls lined with portraits of ancestors who all seemed to have been born knowing how to pose majestically. The moment she stepped out of the car, Sara was met by a sea of bows, curtsies, and titles. Good afternoon, Your Highness. Miss Daniels, welcome to St. Ives. This way, future princess. Future princess. The words alone made her knees wobble. Within minutes, she was whisked into what the palace staff called orientation, though it felt more like royal boot camp. Lady Agatha, the no-nonsense head of protocol, led the session with military precision. Curtsy from the knees, not the waist, Agatha instructed, demonstrating with impeccable grace. Sara tried to copy her, wobbling slightly and nearly losing her balance. Too low, Agatha scolded. You're greeting the Queen, not proposing marriage. Next came speech training. When addressing the King, you say, Your Majesty. When speaking to the Queen, Your Majesty. Princes and princesses are Your Highness. Sara blinked. Okay, but what if I mess up? Agatha's lips twitched, almost, into a smile. Let's hope you don't. The lessons continued: how to enter a room, how to sit at a state dinner, how to hold a teacup without looking like an American tourist. It was overwhelming, exhausting, and occasionally hilarious. At one point, Sara curtsied to a portrait. At another, she accidentally called a duke, Sir, instead of Your Grace. And when asked to deliver a mock speech, her attempt to lighten the mood, Hi everyone, thanks for coming to my royal TED Talk, was met with gasps of horror from the etiquette tutors. But despite her comedic missteps, there was something endearing about Sara's approach. She was earnest, willing to learn, and refreshingly herself, even in the face of centuries-old formality. Some staff members, initially skeptical, couldn't help but smile at her humor and warmth. The public, however, wasn't as easily charmed. Within days, the tabloids pounced on the story of the American schoolteacher fiancé. Headlines ranged from mildly curious, from chalkboards to crown jewels, who is Sara Daniels? To brutally skeptical, too ordinary for royalty, and a commoner's clumsy start. Paparazzi photos of her tripping over a red carpet or laughing too loudly at a state luncheon flooded the internet. Commentators debated whether she was princess material. And through it all, Sara tried to keep smiling. even as doubt crept into her heart. "I feel like I'm failing a test I didn't know I signed up for," she confessed to Daniel one night as they walked through the palace gardens. "You're not failing," he assured her. "You're just being you." And that's exactly who I fell in love with. Sara smiled, but the worry didn't vanish. Being herself had always been enough in New Jersey. But in this new world, a world of crowns, curtsies, and centuries of expectation, she wasn't sure if herself would ever be enough. And as the palace prepared for a grand royal gala where she'd be formally introduced to the kingdom, that doubt was about to be tested like never before. If Sara thought royal etiquette lessons were intimidating, meeting Queen Helena of St. Ives made them feel like a warm-up exercise. The day of their first encounter, Sara's nerves were in overdrive. She'd spent an hour trying on dresses before finally settling on a simple but elegant navy gown Daniel assured her was perfect. Lady Agatha had drilled her one last time on protocol: how to curtsy, how to speak, how not to ramble, but none of it prepared her for the woman waiting in the grand reception room. Queen Helena was every inch the monarch, regal, poised, and commanding without uttering a word. Draped in sapphire silk and pearls, she had an aura that seemed to silence the room the moment she entered. Her smile was polite, but her eyes, sharp and assessing, gave nothing away. "Your Majesty," Sara murmured, dipping into a carefully practiced curtsy. Helena's gaze swept over her, cool and measured. "Miss Daniels. Welcome to St. Ives." The words were warm enough, but the tone carried a chill. Sara smiled nervously, trying to bridge the gap with conversation. "It's truly an honor to meet you, Your Majesty. Daniel's told me so much about you." "Has he?" the Queen replied, sipping her tea. "I do hope he's told you that being part of this family is not a casual undertaking." And just like that, the subtext was clear. This wasn't a welcome. It was an interview. Over the next several days, Queen Helena made her skepticism increasingly apparent, not through direct confrontation, but through a series of carefully orchestrated tests that would challenge even the most seasoned royal. The charity gala, Sara's first assignment, was to host a high-profile fundraising event for the Royal Children's Trust. The Queen's expectations were sky-high. Every detail, from the guest list to the speech, had to be flawless. Sara prepared meticulously, but when she accidentally mispronounced the name of a foreign ambassador in her speech, whispers rippled through the ballroom. Helena's polite smile never faltered, but the raised eyebrow said it all. The formal dinner, next came a state dinner with visiting dignitaries. Sara spent hours memorizing seating charts and titles, but the formality of the event was suffocating. She cracked a light-hearted joke to ease the tension, only to be met with stunned silence. "Humor," Helena commented later, "is a delicate tool in diplomacy. Best used sparingly." The diplomatic meeting. Finally, Sara was invited to sit in on a meeting with foreign envoys, a subtle but significant test of her ability to handle serious royal matters. She tried to contribute thoughtfully, but when asked about St. Ives' economic policies, she fumbled. "I teach teenagers about the Boston Tea Party," she stammered. The Queen's lips tightened almost imperceptibly. Each test left Sara feeling smaller, less sure of herself. It wasn't that she didn't want to rise to the challenge, she did. But the unspoken message was clear: she didn't belong here. Not in the palace. Not in this world. One evening, after yet another formal dinner where she felt invisible beside polished aristocrats, Sara confided in Daniel. "She hates me," she whispered, curling up beside him on a velvet settee in the palace library. "I try so hard, but I keep messing everything up." Daniel brushed a strand of hair from her face. She doesn't hate you, Sara. She just doesn't know you yet. My mother believes in tradition, and you represent change. It scares her. She thinks I'm not good enough for you. He smiled gently. Then she's wrong. You're more than good enough. And I don't care how many galas or dinners it takes. I want you, not a perfect princess. Could a girl from Maplewood, New Jersey, a history teacher with a rescue cat and a love for takeout, ever truly belong in a world of crowns, diplomacy, and centuries-old expectations? As Queen Helena watched from the shadows of the palace balcony, a knowing look crossed her face. The tests weren't over. In fact, they were only just beginning. And she was certain that soon, Sara Daniels would decide on her own that she didn't belong in St. Ives. Life in the palace quickly became a masterclass in humility for Sara, and a comedy show for anyone watching. No amount of etiquette training could fully prepare her for the reality of royal life, and her first few weeks were a series of delightful disasters. Her most infamous misstep came during her introduction to Sir Reginald, a senior member of the Royal Council. Determined to make a perfect impression, she approached with what she hoped was regal grace, only to perform a flawless, deep curtsy to the royal family's golden retriever, Duke. The room erupted into polite coughs and poorly concealed laughter. Well, she said, cheeks burning as Daniel tried not to laugh, he does have a very noble bearing. Another time, while attempting to pour tea for a visiting ambassador from Austria, her hands trembled just enough to send a stream of Earl Grey splashing across his trousers. I was aiming for diplomacy, not laundry, she muttered, mortified. Yet the ambassador chuckled, charmed by her sincerity, and assured her that tea accidents had happened to far more seasoned royals. These little blunders, though embarrassing, became part of Sara's charm. The palace staff, initially stiff and skeptical, began to soften. The head butler, who once barely spoke to her, started sneaking her extra desserts from the royal kitchen. The Queen's stern lady-in-waiting secretly showed her the shortcuts to palace etiquette. Even the notoriously grumpy gardener began leaving fresh flowers outside her window each morning. Sara's greatest strength wasn't her ability to curtsy perfectly or memorize titles, it was her authenticity. At a children's charity event, instead of delivering the stiff, pre-written speech prepared by the royal PR team, she spoke from the heart about her own students back home. She talked about their dreams, their struggles, and how education could change a life. Her words brought the crowd to its feet and reduced more than a few dignitaries to tears. Later, at a palace garden party, she ditched the rehearsed formalities and mingled with guests as if they were old friends, laughing, asking questions, and even teaching a group of noble women how to play heads up on her phone. By the end of the night, even the most traditional courtiers were smiling and calling her refreshingly real. The public, too, began to take notice. The same tabloids that once called her the clumsy commoner now ran headlines like Sara's heart wins over St. Ives and a princess for the people. Photographs of her laughing with children, shaking hands with farmers, and even sneaking a cupcake at a royal banquet went viral. The people loved that she wasn't polished or perfect, she was relatable. She was real. Daniel, ever her biggest supporter, watched all of this with growing admiration. "You're doing it, you know," he told her one evening as they watched the sun set over the palace gardens. "You're proving them wrong, not by changing who you are, but by showing them why they fell in love with you in the first place." Sara smiled, leaning into him. "I'm trying my best. But sometimes it still feels like I'm a substitute teacher pretending to run a kingdom." "You're more than enough," he whispered, kissing her forehead. And if you can make me believe in myself, you can make a whole kingdom believe in you too. Bit by bit, Sara's place in esteem. Ives began to solidify. The woman who once tripped over red carpets was now charming diplomats. The teacher who doubted she could belong was inspiring a nation. And though the Queen's approval remained elusive, even Helena couldn't ignore the shift happening around her. The people of St. Ives had spoken, and they were starting to see Sara Daniels not as an outsider, but as the heart of their future queen. For a while, it seemed like Sara had finally found her rhythm in royal life. The palace staff greeted her warmly in the corridors, the public cheered for her during appearances, and even some of the courtiers who once whispered behind her back now nodded in approval. But beneath the polished smiles and glowing headlines, there was a tension building, one that Sara couldn't quite put into words. The pressure of expectation was relentless. Every step she took, every word she spoke, was scrutinized by advisors, diplomats, and the press. One wrong move could become an international headline. And though Daniel always reassured her, she could feel the weight he carried too, the meetings that ran late into the night, the whispered discussions with the council, the sudden silences when she entered a room. One evening, while returning from a charity visit, Sara turned down a quiet hallway in search of Daniel. She was about to step into his study when she froze. Voices drifted through the half-closed door. "She is charming, yes," said Lord Harrington, a senior advisor whose disapproval of her had never been subtle. "But charm isn't enough to lead a nation. The people expect a queen who understands statecraft, not one who jokes with schoolchildren and trips over carpets." "She's learning," Daniel replied, his tone steady but weary. "And she's connecting with the people in ways none of us could." "Be that as it may," Harrington pressed, "there are constitutional realities. If you choose to marry Miss Daniels, it could complicate the succession. Some members of Parliament believe a commoner bride undermines the monarchy's stability." There was a long pause before Daniel spoke again. "Are you saying I have to choose?" "I'm saying," Harrington said gravely, "that the throne must always come first. And if you cannot make decisions that reflect that, perhaps you are not ready to be king." The silence that followed was deafening. Sara felt her chest tighten as if the air had been sucked from the corridor. She stepped back quietly, her heart pounding, and slipped away before Daniel could notice her standing there. That night, she couldn't sleep. The words replayed in her mind again and again. "If you choose to marry Miss Daniels, and perhaps you are not ready to be king." Was she worth the cost of a crown? Was she worth Daniel risking his duty, his future, his country? The doubts she had tried so hard to silence came rushing back, louder than ever. She thought about her old life, the cozy apartment, the laughter with students, the quiet simplicity of Maplewood. It had been ordinary, yes, but it had been safe. Here, every moment felt like walking a tightrope with the eyes of a nation watching her every step. The next morning, she found herself staring at a half-packed suitcase in the corner of her room. Just in case, she told herself. Just in case she decided she didn't belong here. Daniel noticed the change in her. "You've been distant," he said gently one evening as they strolled through the rose garden. "Is something wrong?" "No," she lied, forcing a smile. "Just tired." But inside, her heart was breaking. She loved him, more than she had ever loved anyone. But love, she realized, might not be enough. Maybe stepping away was the only way to protect him from having to make an impossible choice. And so, as the palace prepared for an upcoming state banquet, one that would officially introduce her as Daniel's fiancée, Sara found herself wondering if she'd even be there when the doors opened. Because sometimes, loving someone means walking away before you become the reason they lose everything. The morning was overcast and gray, the kind of day that seemed to match Sara's mood perfectly. Her suitcase sat beside her on the worn wooden bench of St. Ives Central Station, the engagement ring glinting faintly on her finger as if asking whether it still belonged there. Trains came and went, their whistles echoing through the chilly air, but Sara remained frozen, heart heavy and thoughts tangled. She hadn't told anyone she was leaving. Not Daniel, not the palace staff, not even Melissa back home. It wasn't that she didn't love him, she did, more than anything. But love, she'd convinced herself, wasn't enough if it meant tearing him between the life he was born into and the life he wanted with her. She pictured him on the throne, dignified and regal, without the whispers of commoner queen haunting his reign. Maybe, she thought, walking away was her final act of love. Sara. The sound of her name cut through the noise of the station. She froze. No. It couldn't be. But when she turned, there he was, Daniel, sprinting down the platform in an immaculate suit, completely out of breath and very much out of place among the bustling travelers. Heads turned. Phones came out. Even a train conductor muttered, "Is that?" as Daniel weaved through the crowd. He skidded to a stop in front of her, panting, his hair slightly disheveled and his tie askew. "You are incredibly hard to chase in dress shoes," he gasped. Sara's heart twisted painfully. "Daniel, what are you doing here?" "What does it look like?" he said, throwing his hands up. "I'm stopping the love of my life from running away before she gives me a chance to say something stupid and dramatic in public." "Daniel, don't, no," he interrupted gently, stepping closer. "You don't get to decide for me. You don't get to vanish because you think you're protecting me." She looked away, blinking back tears. "I heard you. The council. They said you might have to choose between me and the throne. And I can't be the reason you lose everything you've worked for." Daniel took her hands, his grip warm and steady. "Sara, listen to me. I don't want the throne without you. I don't want a crown if it means a lifetime of wondering what could have been. Do you know why I fell in love with you?" She shook her head, tears threatening to spill. "I fell in love with you because you're real. Because you challenge me. Because you treat me like a person, not a prince. You spill tea on diplomats, you make history jokes during state dinners, and you somehow convince grumpy ambassadors to smile. You don't try to fit into my world, you make my world bigger, brighter, better. And I don't ever want to rule a kingdom that doesn't have you in it." The platform had gone quiet around them, the crowd now watching with rapt attention. Somewhere in the back, someone sighed romantically. Another person whispered, "I think he's proposing." Daniel dropped to one knee, right there between the benches and the departing trains. "Sara Daniels," he said, smiling despite the tears glistening in his eyes, "I asked you once to marry me as Daniel, the man you met at a barbecue. Now I'm asking you again, not just as a man, but as a prince. Will you be my queen? My partner? My forever?" Sara's breath caught. A dozen thoughts raced through her mind, the doubts, the fears, the weight of royal life, but they all melted away under the warmth of his gaze. Because in that moment, it wasn't about crowns or titles. It was about them. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, stronger, as joy bubbled up inside her. "Yes. Of course, yes." The crowd erupted into cheers as Daniel stood and swept her into a kiss that was as passionate as it was heartfelt. For the first time since arriving in St. Ives, Sara felt something shift, not just in her heart, but in her soul. She wasn't an outsider. She wasn't an obstacle. She was part of this story, part of his life, and together they would write the next chapter. As they walked hand in hand out of the station, laughing and teary-eyed, Daniel glanced at her with that familiar, teasing smile. "You know, I'm never letting you near a train unsupervised again." Sara giggled, leaning into him. "Deal. But you're carrying my luggage next time, Your Highness." And just like that, the weight that had been crushing her lifted, replaced by something stronger, steadier, and infinitely more powerful, the certainty that love, when it was real, could stand against anything, even a crown. After Daniel's dramatic confession at the train station, everything changed, not in an instant, but in a slow, meaningful way. Sara still had doubts, of course. Royal life was still intimidating, and the thought of standing beside a future king sometimes made her stomach twist into knots. But this time, she wasn't running. She had chosen to stay, to fight for their love, and for her place in this world. And that meant facing her greatest challenge yet, Queen Helena. The Queen's polite but distant demeanor hadn't softened since Sara's arrival. There were no cruel words, no dramatic confrontations, just a quiet, unwavering skepticism. But Sara knew she couldn't marry Daniel without at least trying to earn his mother's trust. And so, she decided to do what she did best, teach. But this time, on a much larger scale. "Education," she told Daniel one morning over breakfast, "is what I know. It's where I'm strongest. If I can show her that I'm not just here to wear a tiara, that I want to make a difference, maybe she'll finally see me differently." And so, the Royal Initiative for Youth Education was born. Sara threw herself into planning the event, working tirelessly with palace staff, local schools, and charitable organizations. The idea was simple but powerful: a day-long festival at the palace grounds dedicated to underprivileged children, with workshops, book drives, science demonstrations, art stations, and scholarship announcements. It wasn't just a royal appearance, it was a bridge between the world she'd left behind and the one she was stepping into. On the day of the event, the palace gardens buzzed with life. Children ran through colorful tents, teachers shared stories, and volunteers passed out books and school supplies. Sara moved among them with ease, laughing, kneeling to speak eye to eye with the kids, helping one shy boy build his first model volcano. Queen Helena arrived quietly, escorted by her attendants, and observed from a distance. Her expression was unreadable as she watched Sara in her element, not as a nervous outsider, but as a confident leader shaping something meaningful. When the time came for Sara's speech, she stood before the gathered families, teachers, dignitaries, and press, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "When I first came here," she began, "I felt out of place. I worried that who I was, a teacher from New Jersey, wasn't enough to belong in a world like this. But then I realized something important. I don't have to stop being who I am to serve this kingdom. I just have to expand who I am." She glanced toward the Queen, who was watching closely now. "I believe education is the great equalizer. It's how we give children not just knowledge, but hope. It's how we teach them that they matter, no matter where they come from, what they look like, or what titles they do or don't have. That's why I became a teacher, and that's why I want to be more than a princess. I want to be a voice for the children of St. Ives, and a partner to the man I love, building a future worthy of them." The audience erupted into applause. But Sara's eyes stayed on Helena, searching for any sign of approval. After the event, as the crowds dispersed and the children waved goodbye, Sara stood alone on the terrace overlooking the gardens. She heard soft footsteps behind her and turned to see the Queen approaching, still regal, still composed, but with something gentler in her eyes. "You spoke beautifully," Helena said. "And more importantly, you acted beautifully. What I saw today was not a woman trying to be royal. I saw a woman trying to serve, and that is far rarer." Sara swallowed hard. "I love Daniel with all my heart, Your Majesty. But I also love this country. I want to do right by both." Helena studied her for a long moment. Then, to Sara's shock, she smiled, a small, genuine smile that softened her entire face. "Then perhaps I was wrong about you." And then, in a gesture that spoke louder than any words, Queen Helena extended her hand. "Welcome to the family, Sara." Sara's breath caught as she accepted it. "Thank you, Your Majesty." That night, as fireworks lit the sky above the palace and children's laughter echoed in the distance, Daniel wrapped his arms around her. "You did it," he whispered. "You won her over." Sara rested her head against his chest, smiling. "No," she murmured. "I didn't win anything. I just showed her who I really am." And for the first time since stepping into this whirlwind royal life, Sara felt truly at peace, not because she had changed for the crown, but because she had proven she could wear it her way. The weeks leading up to the royal wedding felt like a dream, a chaotic, overwhelming, magical dream that Sara could barely believe she was living. Every morning brought another meeting, another fitting, another layer of ceremony and tradition to absorb. There were flower arrangements to approve, seating charts to finalize, and state guests to accommodate. At times, Sara felt like she was planning a royal summit rather than a wedding. But every time the stress threatened to overwhelm her, Daniel would appear at her side with a reassuring smile and a whisper, "It's just you and me that day. That's all that matters." And slowly, the reality began to sink in. This wasn't just a fairy tale anymore, this was their future. The palace was transformed for the occasion. Its ancient stone walls were draped in silk banners bearing the royal crest, and the gardens were alive with blooming roses and twinkling lanterns. The royal cathedral, a centuries-old masterpiece with soaring ceilings and sunlit-stained glass, was polished to perfection for the ceremony. Streets throughout St. Ives were lined with cheering citizens, waving flags and tossing petals as carriages rolled by. Sara's family arrived from New Jersey a few days before the big day, bringing with them a whirlwind of laughter, chaos, and heart. Her father spent hours trying to figure out how to properly bow. Her mother cried every time she saw Sara in her gown. And her younger brother, Max, somehow managed to get lost in the palace twice, once in the wine cellar, and once in the royal stables. Meanwhile, Daniel's royal cousins, a lively, eccentric bunch, offered their own brand of comic relief. They insisted on teaching Sara the proper way to hold a scepter, as if it's a very heavy breadstick, one advised, debated over who would wear the most elaborate hat, and even orchestrated a surprise flash mob rehearsal of a traditional St. Ives wedding dance in the palace courtyard. Despite the formality of the occasion, laughter filled the palace halls, a reflection of the couple themselves. The morning of the wedding, Sara woke up with butterflies fluttering wildly in her stomach. As her bridesmaids, including her best friend Melissa, flown in as maid of honor, helped her into the gown, she caught her reflection in the mirror and nearly cried. The dress was everything she had dreamed of, a graceful blend of royal tradition and modern simplicity, with delicate lace sleeves and a flowing silk train that shimmered in the morning light. "You look like a princess," Melissa whispered, dabbing at her own eyes. Sara smiled, her voice trembling. "I am a princess, but I'm still me. And that was the truth. She was still Sara Daniels, the passionate history teacher from Maplewood who loved cheesy movies and burned half the dinners she tried to cook. Only now, she was about to marry the love of her life, and step into a future bigger than anything she'd ever imagined. The ceremony, the cathedral bells rang out across the city as Sara's carriage rolled through cheering crowds. When the doors opened and she stepped inside, the room fell silent. Every eye turned toward her, but all she could see was Daniel, standing at the altar, his eyes shining with emotion. He looked every inch the prince, regal in his ceremonial uniform, a royal sash draped across his chest. But when their eyes met, the world around them melted away. It was just the two of them, like it had always been. The ceremony was a breathtaking fusion of centuries-old tradition and touches of modern love. Classical choirs filled the vaulted ceiling with music, while Sara's childhood best friend read a poem she'd written for the couple. They exchanged vows that were deeply personal, filled with humor, sincerity, and promises of adventure. "I promise," Daniel said, his voice steady and warm, "to cherish the woman who taught me that love is not about titles or crowns, but about laughter, kindness, and late-night takeout." "And I promise," Sara replied, grinning through tears, "to stand by you, whether we're ruling a kingdom or just trying to assemble IKEA furniture without arguing." The guests erupted into laughter, and even Queen Helena was caught smiling, dabbing discreetly at the corner of her eye. The celebration, after the ceremony, the palace courtyard transformed into a fairy tale scene for the reception. There were speeches that ranged from heartfelt to hilarious, including one from Max, who started by roasting Daniel's haircut and ended by calling him the best big brother I never had. The first dance was a picture-perfect moment, with Daniel and Sara swaying under a canopy of fairy lights as the orchestra played a soft, romantic melody. Later, the cousins' surprise dance broke the royal formality and had even the most dignified guests laughing and clapping along. As night fell, fireworks burst over the palace gardens, painting the sky in dazzling shades of gold and crimson. Sara leaned into Daniel's arms as they watched, the weight of everything they had overcome settling gently into joy. "We did it," she whispered. "No," Daniel said softly, brushing a tear from her cheek. "You did it. You walked into my world and made it better. And you walked into mine," she said with a smile, "and made it bigger." And as the final fireworks lit up the sky and the crowd cheered for their new prince and princess, Sara realized something profound. This wasn't just a royal wedding. It was the perfect reflection of their love, part fairy tale, part real life, and completely, beautifully theirs. The weeks following the royal wedding unfolded like the final pages of a storybook, except this one was real, and Sara was living it. The newspapers across Europe ran glowing headlines: "A new era for St. Ives, teacher turned princess captures hearts, the people's princess, Sara of St. Ives." Overnight, she had become a symbol of warmth, relatability, and hope, not because she fit the mold of royalty, but because she had redefined it. But while the titles and tiaras were new, Sara was determined to stay true to herself. Life as Princess Sara didn't mean abandoning the person she had always been, the teacher, the advocate, the woman who believed in the power of knowledge. Instead, it became an opportunity to dream bigger than she ever could have in her classroom back in Maplewood. Within months, Sara launched the Royal Education Initiative, a program aimed at providing better access to schools, libraries, and scholarships throughout St. Ives. She personally visited classrooms across the kingdom, sometimes arriving with Daniel in tow, sometimes showing up unannounced just to read stories to the children or teach a surprise history lesson. The kids loved her. Teachers saw her as an ally. And parents admired the princess who spoke passionately about homework, curiosity, and chasing dreams. Education changes everything, she told a crowd during one of her speeches. It changed my life. And if we can give that gift to every child in St. Ives, then we give them not just knowledge, we give them possibility. Her efforts made a real difference. Schools received more funding, literacy rates improved, and new scholarships opened doors for young people who once believed higher education was out of reach. And through it all, Daniel was by her side, supporting her, cheering for her, and building his own legacy as a modern, compassionate leader. Their marriage was everything they had hoped it would be, full of laughter, shared adventures, and quiet moments of love that kept them grounded. They traveled the world together on diplomatic visits, but they also spent lazy Sundays baking disastrous desserts in the palace kitchen or binge-watching documentaries in their pajamas. Daniel still left her silly notes in her lunch bag, and Sara still teased him for being too princely when he insisted on opening every door for her, and though the crown sometimes felt heavy, they carried it together, partners in every sense of the word. Fairy tales, Sara realized, were never truly about perfection, they were about possibility. And their story was proof of that. It wasn't flawless or seamless, it was messy and funny and filled with detours. It was about two people from completely different worlds who dared to meet in the middle and build something extraordinary together. Sara and Daniel's love had weathered misunderstandings, doubts, and royal pressures, yet it emerged stronger with every challenge. They had learned that love was not about crowns or titles, but about partnership, about laughter shared over burnt pancakes, whispered encouragement before daunting speeches, and hands clasped tightly during life's most uncertain moments. In the years that followed, St. Ives flourished under their influence. Daniel ruled with empathy and innovation, guided by the woman who had taught him the power of humanity over protocol. Sara continued to champion education and youth programs, becoming a beloved figure not just as a princess, but as a teacher who never stopped believing in people's potential. Together, they blended the grandeur of tradition with the warmth of everyday life, state dinners followed by movie nights, diplomatic tours mixed with spontaneous weekend picnics. And every time they stepped onto the palace balcony, side by side, waving to the cheering crowds below, Sara's heart swelled with the same awe she had felt the first time she'd walked those halls. Only now, it wasn't disbelief that filled her chest. It was belonging. "Not bad for a girl from Jersey," she'd whisper, every time, and Daniel would laugh, kiss her, and reply, "Not bad for a prince who found his queen." Their story was living proof that happily ever afters weren't about glass slippers or perfect endings. They were about choosing each other, day after day, and building a life that was as real as it was magical. And as they continued their journey, hand in hand, heart to heart, one thing remained certain: Sara and Daniel would live royally ever after, not because destiny demanded it, but because love made it so.
The Stories book is a captivating collection of tales that traverse diverse genres and emotions, spanning the realms of fantasy, science fiction, romance, and mystery. Each narrative is a journey into the unexpected, weaving intricate plots and compelling characters. With a skillful blend of vivid imagery and thought-provoking themes, this anthology invites readers to explore the depths of imagination and discover the universal threads that connect us all. From heartwarming moments to spine. We hope you enjoyed these captivating video stories. Be sure to subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming content like this. Thanks for watching, and keep spreading the video story.